Hello. I'm Jon Hallemeier. I'm in the Integrated Conservation Anthropology. It's my home department. And before I begin, just to make sure it happens, I'd like to thank my advisor, Don Nelson, and my committee members who've been helping me to develop my ideas and for this great opportunity to present and hopefully get some ideas about directions I'm going. So, to begin with, should let you know that there's going to be two distinct parts to this presentation. There's going to be this part about durable social landscapes, which is a project that I developed last fall. And I'll go over the research problem, my case study, and a quick sketch of that research, fairly brief. But then because what I've developed so far, I feel is very socially oriented, I have some ideas for ways to bring more robustly ecological and integrative parts to this project. And so we'll go over those. And these ideas are forest cover and ginseng as being some really interesting ways, I think. And so hopefully I have time to talk about those and hopefully get some ideas about how I could further develop those ideas. So first, with this idea of durable social landscapes. My research is based on three premises. The first premise is that participatory natural resource management is hard. I'll call it NRM from now on because that'll be a bit easier. And so bringing people in and communities together with managers to create management plans is a hard thing. It has goals to empower local communities, to make use of local knowledge, and to create better, more sustainable management plans and ways of dealing with natural resources. But along with these goals, there's a lot of hardships. There's a lot of examples of failure, of mixed results, a few of success, but it's a hard thing to do. Over the period of time where participatory NRM has been going on, there's been lots of research that show that the formal aspects of governance influence success and failure in participatory NRM. That's my second premise. And here I'm talking about, for governance, for my purposes, is the ways that decisions are made. And the formal aspects would be the institutions, would be the policies, would be any sort of particular process of decision making that's being put in place. And the informal aspects would be social networks, relationships of trust, institutional cultures, other sort of cultural and social things that are not as formal. And there's lots of literature out there that talks about how trust relations can hinder or help a participatory process, and social networks of different kinds can also be obstacles or not. And because of that, there's been a lot of research within natural resource management literature about how to deal with that. And there are many ideas about how to structure and design better processes to foster good social dynamics, good informal aspects of governance. There's a lot of emphasis in the literature I've been reading about creating spaces for social learning and linking. And so there's lots of ideas about how to deal with this social aspect. That brings me to my third premise, that these informal aspects of governance are rooted in a durable social landscape. And by this I mean they extend beyond simply the time or space of that particular project. That you have social networks that extend beyond, that you have grievances or issues of trust that may require tools, timescales, and resources beyond that are possible to bring into a single participatory process or decision making. And that we might need to be thinking about different scales and different uses of resources rather than simply well-designed processes, which are important but may not be which are not the whole thing. All right. And so that brings me to my research in particular. And since I can't talk about all these informal aspects of governance, I'm going to be talking about trust and legitimacy as being ones that come from the literature as particularly important and I find pretty interesting. And so from these three premises, my three basic questions are, how are trust and legitimacy rooted in the broader social landscape? So how are these important informal aspects of governance rooted in this larger context? And then second is, how do they express themselves in decision-making processes? So how do trust and legitimacy that are rooted in this large context actually influence, hinder, or act as obstacles to success? And then how do they change over time? And so the idea here is to contribute to ideas of beyond just getting the rules right, getting the processes right, but what are the underlying social processes? What are the underlying dynamics that that we should be looking at, with the idea that contributing to ideas of how to think about success of participatory processes, how to think about use of resources, and how to think about the place of the manager and scientists and all these managing bodies within their bit larger social context, and how they should be thinking about using their tools, using their resources, and if it should be all based on these smaller processes or other ways of changing or facilitating positive social dynamics. And so in looking at this, I'll be focusing on Western North Carolina, which you can see right there. And the green there, I could use that. All this is the Nantahala, well, some is the Chattahoochee and other parts, but the part in Western North Carolina is mostly the Nantahala and Pisgah National Forests, which are very fragmented, kind of, as you can see, they're all in there's lots of public and private land right next to each other. And right now, they're going through a 3-year management plan revision. So it's just started this past year. It'll go for probably 2 more years, maybe even more. There might be some delays. And it will guide management of these forests for the next 15 to 20 years. The last one that occurred was in '87, it started. It was made, but then after long protracted lawsuits and collective action and protests, there was extensive amendments in 1994. So it was a very politically intense process the last time around. And it looks like, again, there's many interests coming to the table who definitely want to influence the way these forests are going to be managed. And the Forest Service is conducting a formal process of public meetings and other ways to collect public input, but mostly in a way that seems very similar to previous processes where people are coming to the Forest Service and lobbying for their particular interests. And there's very little idea in some of these public meetings about where this input's going to go or how it's going to be used. And there are many people in this region who are somewhat unhappy with that process and are looking to more collaborative ways of creating a revision plan. And among these is the Nantahala-Pisgah Forest Partnership, which is a collaborative I've been working with since this past summer. And they're bringing in environmentalists, timber and non-timber products, cultural heritage, water interests, recreation, wildlife. There's many interests involved in talking with each other and trying to find out collaborative, more consensus-driven ways of solving problems and innovating new visions of the forest rather than lobbying the Forest Service. And so in this context, using interviews, using participant observation, and iterated interviews throughout the process with members of the Nantahala-Pisgah Forest Partnership, people involved with these public processes, Forest Service people, and people who are not involved, trying to answer these questions that I talked about before. So asking, like, how are trust and legitimacy rooted in the broader social landscape? Like, what do people trust the, how are decisions made? Who are the important actors? Is it the Forest Service? Is it these big organizations? Do people trust the Forest Service and these other organizations? Do they trust this whole process as a way that their voices will be heard? And then how do they express themselves in decision-making processes? Do people engage or not? Do people engage with this formal process, with the informal process, or not at all? And then are there any changes? And again, thinking about looking at these larger processes that underlie success or failure or obstacles within management's decision-making. And I think these are very social questions. There's not really much of an ecological or integrative aspect to these, I don't think, as of yet. It doesn't really matter what resources underlie these. So I will now move on to my second part of my presentation, which is trying to gauge some of my ideas about how to move forward in a more integrative way. And the first thought I have is to look at forest cover. Thinking about the links and mutual influences between the forest and social landscape. Particularly, I'm thinking about the durable impacts of the last forest plan, and that was 1987 and then 1994. It's cut out the clear cutting, and it's reduced timbering generally to a large extent, which has had a big impact on forest structure now. There's a lot less early successional habitat, which you actually hear a lot in these public meetings, that you have a lot of people who want to hunt grouse and deer who like these more open areas. There's less open areas because there's less clear cutting and things like that, among other impacts, I'm sure. And there's also been in the last 20 years a boom in recreation. So you have a drop in timber and a boom in recreation. And also amenity migration, so people coming in with second homes. And as you saw in the little map, that is very fragmented. So you have development right next to public lands. And so that's having its own impact, that you have development that's creating erosion and other impacts all around this area, which I think we can possibly connect to that last management plan and lack of timbering and more focus on recreation. And so this right here, I guess I should explain, is, I don't know if you can see it very well, but do you see like little red dots around here? All right, cool. I can not really see them from this angle, but they're there, I'm sure. And this is just an example of things I've been thinking about. This is forest change over the last, from 2000 to 2012, and the red dots are forest loss, forest cover loss. And they also have forest cover gain due by year. And so just thinking about different ways and like what's causing those. There's obviously natural disturbances, but then also the role of development and these larger processes of both forest and social landscape change. And so thinking about all these changes, all these impacts of the last revision and what's happened in between, and these mutually influencing social and democratic, because you have the change in forest structure, but then you also have this change in forest use and a change in demographics with newcomers coming in with very different ideas about things and very different different incomes and other things like that. And these are all coming to play in this new forest plan. And so looking at these linkages through that time scale, I think would be interesting. The other thing I'm thinking about, the other plan that I'm pursuing is American ginseng, which is Panax quinquefolia, something like that. And it is, I just learned about it this summer, really. I didn't really know it. I kind of knew about it, maybe as much as some of you know about it, which is that it's used in like teas and things like that, and it's quite popular with in the health industry. But it's been harvested in southern Appalachia and other parts of the country for over 250 years, mostly for the Asian market. And it continues to this day. It's one of the few organisms harvested under the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species. And it's the highest exported one from the United States. It's incredibly, has a large economic impact. 1 dried pound of ginseng, of wild ginseng, goes for over $500. Whereas cultivated is under $100, so there's a big differential there between what you can get for the wild forage stuff. And it continues to be part of the livelihood of many people that I've been able to talk to in Western North Carolina, taking a larger or smaller part of that livelihood, and particularly after the the recession that we just had. And harvesting has had a lot of ecological impacts and impacts on this plant, from genetics to stature to creating small populations that are very susceptible to local extirpation. And there's lastly been a big change this past year where the Forest Service has changed its policy because of impacts of concern over the plant, where they've greatly reduced it and kind of made it impossible for many local people to harvest it legally. And that's caused a lot of anger, even to the extent that some people, there's been talk of burning the forest down and things like that. There's like a lot of very passionate people about this. And so I think my research there would be looking at this history and then looking at the current management and how the management could be done better. And I think it would be a great opportunity for participatory action research and actually connecting people, figuring out what the different ideas are, because there's a lot of local expertise and scientific expertise that could be brought to bear that I don't think are actually connected right now. So I think there's a lot of interest there and a lot of interest in the forest cover. And thank you very much for your time. And I'd love to hear any comments.